Colonel Doug Macgregor delivers a chilling warning. Russia, he says, has only 7 weeks to end the war. Gold is replacing the US dollar. And if America falls into crisis, millions of Israelis may flee the Middle East. What else does he reveal about Trump, about Epstein, and about America's own 1789 moment? Stay with us until the end.
Zelensky is celebrating the arrival of more revenge weapons, long-range strike weapons that he can hurl at people. So the Russians are taking a position. They've got 7 weeks. You got to wrap it up because at week 7, you're starting into mid-September. That's when you begin to get a lot of rain, a lot of mud. By the time October hits, it's a giant swamp. So you want to get as far west as you possibly can, as quickly as you can, while you have decent weather and good ground. I would be surprised if they didn't do that. Now, I've been surprised before, but I think this is different.
It has a different feel to it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think President Putin knows he's done everything in his power to try and cultivate a good relationship with President Trump. He had high hopes, and I think many people in Russia had high hopes that President Trump's arrival on the scene would be a game changer, that there would be an opportunity to reach a reasonable agreement that kept Iran out of NATO, that made it a neutral state, whatever it turned out to be, and that would recognize Russia's legitimate national security interests as well as the rights of Russian citizens in Ukraine. That's been dashed now, destroyed. So there's no longer any excuse to wait for something good to happen in Washington. It's not coming. So you might as well end this thing. So my view is, he mentioned 2 cauldrons. This is the old German expression, Kesselschlacht, for a cauldron. In other words, a big pot. Those 2 contain most of what's left of Ukrainian fighting power, as far as I can tell. So the only thing you've got left are drones and revenge weapons. And there is a large concentration, let's call it a column or 2, further north headed towards Kiev. Just within the last 48 hours, there was this almost panicked report that came out of Kiev. There are 160,000 Russian troops and they're headed to Kiev. Well, that's not really true. There are troops headed in that direction, not 160,000, but they have at the vanguard the Akhmat Brigade. And these are Chechen forces along with Wagner forces that have coalesced into a very tough outfit. And they've got lists of names of war criminals, people that have murdered Russians and Ukrainians on behalf of the regime. And they're going after them as they advance west. And I think that scares the living daylights out of the Zelensky inner circle and its regime in Kiev. And it should, because they've got to go there and they've got to deal decisively with these people, or there will be no end to this war.
And that's, this is part of the word. Some of the reports are in the Sumy areas where some of these 160,000 are, which is quite close to Kiev. But last thing I want to ask you about is something that you actually have coming out in the American Conservative. You mentioned earlier in this broadcast here that there are some concerns about, even in the United States, if we keep not paying attention to some of our domestic issues here. And in this piece, which will come out tomorrow, which you kindly gave us an intro to, you wrote, in short, Washington is hurtling toward a sovereign debt crisis, escalating foreign wars, and potential domestic unrest without a clear path forward. While President Trump did not create these challenges alone, he now bears responsibility for addressing them. He campaigned promises on accountability, transparency, and fiscal reform, yet have to be realized. The proverbial buck stops with this administration. But, and then you continued on, like the Parisians of 1789, this is what got my attention, America's response powerfully to appeals that honor virtue and condemn vice. It would be a grave mistake for Trump to ignore the impact of the Epstein scandal, especially as it coincides with his administration's failure to fulfill key campaign pledges. What is it about today and the 1789 that has your alarm bells ringing?
Well, you know, I go back and I try to understand what's happened before in other settings. And of course, the French Revolution, which continues to echo today across Europe and the world, as the Chinese once pointed out, is a good place to start. The problems that affected Louis XVI and his government at the time were very similar to what we face. They had a tremendous fiscal crisis because of gross mismanagement and extravagant spending. They also had a lost war on their hands. When I say lost war, well, they helped us gain independence from the British, but it cost them enormous quantities of money. They had to send a fleet and manpower over. We're very fortunate they did that, because otherwise we would not be sitting here talking as Americans, Dan. But the bottom line is those things have to be viewed in the context of the comments, because the fiscal emergency is already upon us. People that live in this country know what the effects of inflation are. They know how the prices rise. They know what they're paying for things. And they know the truth about jobs and unemployment and who's working and who's left the workforce. We don't need to go over all that, but Americans know what's happening. And now on top of that, you have this other problem with Epstein. Now, why is the Epstein issue a problem? Because President Trump was elected in large part the first time, and again the second time, for accountability, transparency. He was elected because people saw him as different, as not part of the larger problem in Washington. But the truth is, it looks like he's very much a part of the problem he was elected to solve. And that's very, very dangerous, because that happened in France. There was a time between 1780 and 1789 when the population overwhelmingly concluded that the ruling class was decadent, depraved, degenerate, and unworthy to rule. And when this coincided with the fiscal problems, the inflation, the lack of money, the inability of people to sustain themselves, as we always talk about, they simply could not even buy bread. When that finally came together, you had an explosion in 1789. And that revolution was incredibly destructive. It eventually ends in 1795 to some extent. I shouldn't say ends, but certainly abates. It's Bonaparte, when he takes over, who finally puts an end to it. My point is, there are already people looking at us around the world and saying, look at the United States Republic. It's failed miserably. It's corrupt. It's ineffective. It's inefficient. It's unserious. Democracy itself is on trial, and people are saying it's failed. All right? That's the problem. And President Trump is at the center of this. He's at the top of the pyramid. And he is too close to people that, frankly, are despicable. And Americans are shocked. Now, you're always going to have the usual suspects in the party structures that see this as an opportunity for them to benefit. He says that, he's not wrong. But the point is, he's tainted now, very seriously. That does not help his case. And I think that we still have a lot of problems here at home that we gloss over, that we pretend aren't there, involving not just social and cultural and economic things, but also racial things. All of these things we need to deal with. And we've been talking about this for a long time. Bring the forces back. If we're serious about this deportation business, where's the strategy? Where's the plan? Where are the assets? Where's the manpower? How are we going to do it? And people now say, oh, well, the latest polls say Americans don't like that. First of all, I don't buy that necessarily. And I think Tom Homan was right when earlier today or yesterday he was asked about, well, polls said X, Y, and Z. He said, I don't believe it, because everywhere I go, I run into Americans who are desperate for us to enforce the law. I think he's right. I think Americans want the law enforced. So President Trump needs to back away, take the broad perspective, look at the wide range of possibilities, and don't underestimate the impact of this Epstein mess. It's ugly, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. It may be like Watergate. I don't know.
And what do you think about this this potential distraction? Maybe there's some substance in it. There apparently appears to be some. I'm not sure it's as strong as what's being claimed about this whole Obama and his senior guys changing the intelligence, et cetera. But it seems like that there's a pretty concerted effort to make everybody say, no, don't look at Epstein. Look at this, Obama. Obama's always the evil one for many on the right. And do you think that they're going to be successful at distracting everybody away from Epstein over to this issue?
Well, there's an easy test. Where are the attorneys in the Justice Department preparing cases? Are they doing anything? Are we going to see any grand juries? Are we going to indict anybody? And if we indict, are we going to go out and arrest anybody? Privately, I don't see much evidence that very much will happen. That's not saying that I don't think it's true. I think Tulsi Gabbard is telling the truth. But I think it's also being released at a point in time that's designed to distract from what you mentioned, the Epstein problem. No doubt about it. At the end of the day, it's back to what President Trump promised: accountability, transparency, good government. Can he deliver? Because in people's eyes right now, that's the real question. And we've got to give him a little more time. But after about 6 months, you would expect to see better. And at the end of 9 or 10 months, in any presidential administration in the first year, you're beginning to lose airspeed and altitude. You know, you only have so long to make your dent, so to say, in things. So,
let me ask you this as sort of the last few minutes we have here, related to what President Trump ran on and what people voted for him on was to get us out of these dumb wars, not start any new ones. And what's going on in the Middle East right now, because it really is starting to look like, not starting to look like, it's really looking like Benjamin Netanyahu is pulling the strings for Trump. And now then Trump says, I wanted to improve relations with Syria so that we could get them part of the Abraham Accords. I wanted to get a ceasefire in the Gaza situation, get that over with. And now then I think I dealt with the Iranian situation, pushed them back a couple of years. So let's go with that. And instead you have Israel attacking into Syria and then saying that instead of having a ceasefire for Gaza, they want to actually move deeper into the Gaza Strip, which seems to undermine American objectives. Do the American people see whether these things are happening, and how do they view Trump, who seems to be powerless to stop it?
Well, this is the key question. How many American citizens on any given day pay much attention to what's happening beyond their borders? I don't think very many do. We destroyed Syria. Let's face it. That's what we've been trying to do for the last 15 years. That's not new. That started under President Obama. Now, I don't think Obama particularly cared about it. I think we've had a series of presidents. You know, I know from personal experience, President Clinton had no interest in the Balkans at all. And he was dragged into the Balkans repeatedly by people that worked for him: Albright, Gore, Berger, and others. And Strobe Talbot. That's what happens, unfortunately, especially when you've got a president who is not grounded in the area, in an understanding of the area, in understanding international relations. It also happens when the president's not terribly concerned. Now, I think President Trump may have an understanding of what you just described, but he doesn't know what to do about it. And at this point, what do you do about Syria? It's destroyed. You know, people there are being murdered. They're being killed. And let's face it, Mr. Netanyahu had a real important role to play in that. He was in the forefront of removing this man, Assad, over and over and over again. Edward Luttwak, years ago, said, why are we trying to move Assad out of northern Lebanon? You know, he's providing some measure of stability up there. We're better off with the Syrians there in charge than not. No one listened to him. We got chaos. We're seeing the same thing today in Syria. Now, as part of the Greater Israel Project, they are going to control the watershed near Hebron, the Mount Hebron, and that's fine. But they've got a problem with the Turks now, who are very uncomfortable with this encroachment on territory and a sphere of influence that they historically have enjoyed. I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't see anything good coming out of it, let's be frank. And President Trump is being led around by the CIA and Mossad and MI6 into all of these places, into this Ukrainian morass, into the Israeli morass. And then when you talk about Gaza, I'm sure that President Trump's uncomfortable, but he doesn't seem to have the courage to stand up and say, that's it. We won't support this anymore. You know, you can look at the latest satellite photography, and you begin to look at the statistics that are admitted through the Israeli media and the Western media. They're totally ridiculous. What, 60,000 people killed? That's absurd. We know that far more people have been killed and wounded. Hundreds of thousands, millions have been driven out of their homes. And right now, President Trump is being pressured by the Israel lobby to find places to send Palestinians. So what are we going to do? We can't deport our own illegals that need to be deported, and their deportation is absolutely justified. So instead, we're going to help the Israelis remove people from their homes. It's their home. That's where they live. They have been there for thousands of years. They're not illegal aliens. They didn't migrate into the place and break the law to get there. So it's a very depressing situation.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Doug. So literally the last question here. You just mentioned here about your concerns of a 1789 kind of situation where a financial collapse could cause some real problems at home. In the event that your concerns turn into reality and we actually have an economic serious hardship down there and we have to retrench from overseas, what in the world would happen to Israel in its quest to dominate by military means the entire region if all of a sudden it doesn't have the ammunition, weapons, and diplomatic support from the United States, which it has right now in unlimited quantity? What would happen?
I think millions of Israeli Jews will go to Ben Gurion Airport and try to buy tickets on airplanes to other places, whether it's Costa Rica, Honduras, Buenos Aires, or New York City. That's what I think would happen.
Well, that would be a real problem, and maybe somebody in Israel should start thinking about that right now instead of gambling everything that the perception or the possibilities from the United States and the support and the ammunition will continue at flowing levels forever indefinitely, because I don't think that's a really good bet. That's more like a gamble, but that's their call to make. We'll see what happens with it. But as always,
remember the great Ben Stein. He says things continue until they stop. Yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we're in that position right now. President Trump could have drawn back from the cliff. He could have walked back. Instead, he said, "No, big beautiful bill. Let's leap into the abyss." So we've taken the big leap.
Yeah,
I don't see it ending well. I think Nassim Taleb is right. I think gold is now the reserve currency, not the dollar. I think de-dollarization is well underway. Contrary to what President Trump said recently, BRICS is in good shape. It's roaring forward. It's got lots of people that want to join it, and he's trying to depict it as though it's moribund and dead. Nothing could be further from the truth. So at this point, all we can do is stand next to the railroad and watch the collision or crash with reality that's about to occur.
I fear that you're going to be right on that one too, but we'll see. But in any case, we really appreciate you bringing light onto the truth. So if nothing else, nobody can claim they didn't know. And so we appreciate this, and we'll look forward to that article in the American Conservative tomorrow and read it in full. Thank you very much for coming on today, Doug. Always a pleasure.
By the way, it's called